my Zoom co-host, Julie Stevens, is going to be manning the Zoom call. And just for any of you that may not know, Methacton's SEA is a network of support for parents and caregivers of students with developmental disabilities, and developmental and physical disabilities. And we just provide access, like such as the topic tonight on extended school year. I think our presenters were in last year and talked about COVID compensatory services. So we try and bring those, relevant topics to our families and other, districts in our area as well. And then we just try and kind of regularly connect just for social reasons and just to be a support to each other. And then finally, we advocate for the collaboration with our families, school administrators, educators, and professionals to just foster successful outcomes for our students. Tonight's presentation, as you know, is how to qualify and program for extended school year. We do have a little change, as I shared with some of you in the email, in terms of presenters. But from Raphael Associates, we have Rainey.
Bienenfeld.
I have it in my head the way I thought it was. Say it again for me.
Oh, sure. Like Beanie Baby.
Bienenfeld. Okay, I just was saying it wrong before and I didn't untrain myself. So Bienenfeld, Rainey Bienenfeld is an attorney with Raphael and Associates. And then Maria Vetter is one that has been with us before. She's a special education consultant and advocate. So I'm going to turn it over to the two of you to talk about extended school year. And I'll stop sharing so you can.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandy. It's just an honor to be here with you guys again and presenting as usual. We are going to put up slides for you guys as we go through. I know some of this is content heavy, but we'll try to make it fun as possible. And we will give the slides to Sandy to distribute with our notes for the slides, but we do have our contact information on it as well. So please always feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions. We will, I'm sure, have some time at the end. I know there were some questions that were submitted ahead of time that we can make sure that we address, but then also if you have questions as we go through, you can just type them into the chat and we'll just keep that going. And then at the end, we'll just make sure anything that we didn't address or other questions that come up per our answers, we can just, have a nice dialogue at the end. So I will start sharing screen in a minute and Rainey is gonna get us on our way.
Okay, here we go. So ESY, which stands for Extended School Year Services, that is the meat and potatoes of our conversation tonight. And that's our intro slide. So what is extended school year services? So typically ESY includes special education and related services that are provided past the typical 180 days that are within the school year. It's based on federal statute, but if you are looking for it in Pennsylvania, which goes into more detail on what ESY is, you can find it in Chapter 14, which is special education services for students in the state of Pennsylvania. And then Chapter 711 relates to ESY for children in charter schools and virtual charter schools. So with respect to early intervention, the EI services run throughout the year, but there are usually a lot of breaks. Sometimes they're a week or 2 or 3. And so early intervention services do apply. ESY, does apply to early intervention services. And so if you have a student who's in EI and requires that extra services during those breaks, that is something that you can convene an IEP meeting for and request ESY during those breaks. It is an individualized decision, and so we'll talk about that later on in the slides. For school age students that would apply during the summertime. And then also with respect to students who are graduating when they turn 21, even if a student has graduated, you can have an IEP meeting to discuss whether or not the student can get ESY for that summer right after the graduation. So what is ESY not? It's not considered daycare or respite services. It's not typically a camp or recreational program, even if that program does have educational benefit to the student. It's not typically an alternative educational program. And they're not just limited to self-help and basic skill building. So, the child's academic goals and vocational goals, that can be a part of ESY, whether it's reading intervention or social skills development. So there are some timelines that we're going to clue you in on, so that way you can be aware of what to look out for as the year progresses. And it's February, there's snow on the ground, but yet in some cases we are already talking about ESY. So for students with severe disabilities, which is defined in the Pennsylvania statute as students with autism, PDD, serious emotional disturbance, mental, well, it says retardation, but intellectual disabilities or degenerative impairments with mental involvement, for that subset of students, the IEP team has to meet no later than February 28th to discuss ESY services and eligibility. And then the NOREP, which stands for the Notice of Recommended Educational Placement, it's probably a document you're familiar with seeing. It sets forth services that the district is offering to students. That has to be issued to a parent no later than March 31st with what the ESY determination is for that upcoming summer. For students who don't have the severe disability, ESY determinations must be made in a timely manner. So although those deadlines don't necessarily apply to other students with disabilities, it does have to be met in a timely manner, and there needs to be an IEP meeting and a subsequent NOREP that's sent to the family so they have time to discuss it or contest it if they find issue with what it is that's being offered.
So a free and appropriate summer, right? Like what does that really mean? So districts are responsible under IEDEA to provide a FAPE, meaning a free and appropriate public education. I'm sure many people in the group are very familiar with the vernacular and all the acronyms and everything, the lingo that we tend to use. That is so frustrating for so many parents to learn in the beginning. And most educators, unfortunately, take for granted. And so sometimes new families are sitting at meetings and they just feel completely overwhelmed by all of the alphabet soup that gets thrown at them. But really, free and appropriate public education means free, no cost to parents, public education at, public special education and related services in the least restrictive environment, which means time spent with typically developing peers. And I think I left appropriate for the last because I feel like that is what we battle about all the time, right? Like what's appropriate? What do we feel is appropriate? Maybe very different than what the rest of the team feels is appropriate. And there might be other certain members that feel one way or the other. Parents, definitely, we always want what's best for our children. And the law doesn't say best, it says appropriate. But in my mind, I feel like those things kind of go together, or at least it should be closer to that standard. And I know when we talk about all this, we always talk about what it's supposed to look like and what it is supposed to be, and then what does it look like in actual reality. So we're definitely going to hit on that a little bit more through the rest of our slides, because how does a student qualify? And I just like this slide because you think 7 is a lucky number. So there's 7 factors that go into the determination. And really, how does the student qualify? They qualify by the IEP team making that decision. And so no single eligibility factor can be the determinative. You really have to look through all of the factors. So regression, recoupment. Regression, whether the student reverts to a lower level of functioning, as evidenced by measurable decrease in skills or behavior that occur because there's been an interruption in educational programming. So that could mean many things. Like Sandy was saying, we were here during COVID because obviously that was such a significant, huge disruption in education. So kids were having a lot of regression. And when you think about regression and when there's a decrease in skill, you don't always think about social emotional, but that is very important too. When we talk about school, we don't just talk about academics, we talk about academic and social and emotional. So if there's regression in those areas, and then recoupment is whether the student had the capacity to recover the skills or behavior patterns in which the regression to a level demonstrated prior to the interruption of education programming. And like, what does that really mean? It just means like, how long did it take that child to get back to where they were or back to, on the trajectory they would have been if they did not have the interruption. And of course, my favorite, number 3, is actually regression and recoupment together. So you have the factors together because when there is regression, you do have to recoup. So it seems odd that they're kind of a separate factor. But mastery is the extent to which the student has mastered and consolidated an important skill or behavior at the point when educational programming would be interrupted. And that is very meaningful because a break at that time could really cause them to lose that skill. If there's regression at a time of mastery or close to mastery, then you would not want to take the chance, like the stakes are too high to have a break during that time, because you really need to work post-mastery to hit that generalization kind of period to make sure that the skill is really solid. Self-sufficiency and independence. So the extent to which a skill or behavior is particularly crucial for the student to meet the IEP goals of self-sufficiency and independence from caretakers. So this is more what like Rainey was talking about with the Armstrong group of kids that have needs that's so significant that it really impacts daily living and functioning. And those students really need just a higher level of support and cannot bear, like the time is so crucial and so important that having breaks for them would be really detrimental to the progress that they could be making if we did not force them to take breaks in their programming at some level. Could be less programming, but still keeping it, at some level. And then successive interruptions. So the extent to which successive interruptions, try saying that fast, in educational programming result in a student's withdrawal from the learning process. So we would want to make sure, again, the student, they're on their trajectory, they're moving forward, that a lot of interruptions is just going to further delay the progress that they would have or should have been making at that time. And then again, this kind of, to me, kind of goes with that self-sufficiency and independence, but the severity of disability. So whether the student's disability is severe, and they're looking at things again, like autism, developmental disorders, serious emotional disturbance, which I'm actually glad that that gets included because sometimes when it's not academic, I think people don't think about it as much. Intellectual disabilities, degenerative impairments, or multiple disabilities. So that is the 7th factor where you would just not want a break in services. So for a child to be found eligible, it is not necessary that the child have first experienced regression during an interruption in educational programming in order to receive extended school year during the break. So I felt like this slide is very important to include because, we always kind of talk about a child shouldn't have to fail at something to prove that something is needed. But as parents, a lot of times when we're trying to advocate for our kids, we do feel like that is the case. It's very hard to prove that they need something if they're not demonstrating the need at that time, or you just feel that if resources are scarce, the kids who are at a higher level of need are getting it, or the kids that have really been, shown that they will struggle, they will regress, the recruitment time is significant, that those kids are getting allocated the services. But it really is meant to be a discussion between your team members. And if you have any information, experts, data, your own personal knowledge and experience of working with your child, that for any of those factors, they need to continue their services in some way over a break, then you use that information to advocate. And we'll talk a little bit more later about ways to do that. But it is really hard because the mindset is they have to show that they need it. And data is even tracked that way. Sometimes they'll use Christmas break or spring break and collect data and say your child didn't regress, so they don't qualify for ESY. And when I go to those meetings, it's so frustrating because I'm thinking, yeah, like over a week and a half, that is nothing compared to like a 3-month period of time with no services. So, and I'm sure there's people in the group that have been part of those discussions as well. So does ESY have to be individualized? Yes, but individualized is not always the way people think, or the way that we always use the word individualized. So extended school year services must be provided only if a child's IEP team determines on their individual basis that the services are necessary to provide for free and appropriate public education, and the services to a particular categories of disability, right? So they can't limit types or amount of duration of those services, but ESY must be considered at each IEP team meeting. And this determination must be made even if the child's parents have not specifically requested that their child be evaluated for extended school year. So this consideration also applies to students with disabilities who are placed by your district in approved private schools or in other facilities. Like, this should be an ongoing discussion. When you think about, as Rainey said in the beginning, extended school year, we think of it as maybe the summer programming, but it's really meant to be over any break. So there are some students that just can't bear to have more than, a couple days break and need those services. So especially for those students, those should be ongoing conversations and considerations. But the individualized piece really is meant to be, so what kind of programming does ESY include? If you're individualizing the program for your student, their program could be individualized within a district offered ESY program. So a lot of times parents will say, the district's just offering me their ESY program. And that may be very true. And they feel that that's not appropriate because that doesn't mean that it's individualized, and they want a very different program and the district to provide support for that. Well, the bar is set low, unfortunately, I feel like, for ESY, because it's not really meant for growth and progress. It's really meant for maintenance, so that when the school year starts in September, your child is in the same place that they were, at least not worse. Could be better, but the goal is not always better, unfortunately, as I wish it was. That your child is in the same place in September and they haven't really lost all of those skills, or the break hasn't been detrimental to them. So unfortunately, the bar is set kind of low, and programs within districts that are set to be, a certain kind of a program, but that means that the IEP that was in place, certain goals will be addressed, and the instruction will be tailored to your child's needs. So in that way, the overall program in total is not individualized truly, but the instruction that your child is receiving would be individualized, if that makes sense. And I'm sure there's questions, and we can talk about it more later if there are, but it really goes off the IEP. So you're entitled to special education and related services. And special education is instruction that's adapted including adaptations to the content, method, or delivery of instruction. And it's to address the unique needs of the child and ensure access of the child to the general curriculum as best as they can. And then related services. So there are a lot of related services. And what your child gets in ESY is going to be determinative on what they're getting through the school year. A student that does not qualify for speech and language therapy is not going to get speech and language therapy for ESY if it's not included in their programming during the school year. I shouldn't say never. There may be some extraordinary cases where that is warranted, but typically what is offered are things that go off of the student's IEP and inclusive in their IEP. The funny thing is that for many families who've been through this ESY routine for many, many years, they kind of say, how does the district determine what they're providing for my child during ESY? And it feels very much like we'll just half it. Like if your child's getting 4 speech sessions, well, ESY, we're going to offer you 2. Or if your child has physical therapy twice a week, we're going to give it to them once a week or something like that, because twice a week meant that they were making progress. So once a week means they'll maintain their skills. So we don't want to completely take it away because maybe they need it, but we're definitely not going to give it at the same level. And although it does feel that way sometimes, again, that should be part of that discussion, part of that meeting. It may not be okay to take away speech or reduce it in half. It may be okay to drop 1 session, so from 4 sessions down to 3. But, physical therapy, it may be okay to decrease that time. So again, it really should be a discussion that is happening with your team ongoing.
And just to jump in there, more than a few years ago now, but in the last 5 to 10 years, there was actually a pretty big lawsuit in the state of Pennsylvania that had to do with, or the school district of Philadelphia, where schools were just cutting student services in half as a systemic practice. And ultimately, the court found that that was illegal. And so the statute supports this. Like a school district can't just reduce the frequency or duration of services simply because the summer is a short and condensed day. If a student needs XYZ, speech and language in a week, you can't just cut it as a matter of course. It has to be because that's what the individualized needs of the student are.
And Rainey, someone asked in the chat, what was the name of that case? So if you want to drop the link to it or the name of it in the chat for everyone.
Yes, I don't know it offhand. It's been a while, but during the course of this presentation, if not by the end, I'll have it, or we'll email it out after the fact.
Okay, great. So what else can ESY include? I think I operate under the assumption of what it can include anything. What can it include? But ESY services may include, under the law, take home, so instructional materials that your student could be provided that they would take home and work on over the break, behavioral or other training for parents, or program staff, itinerant teacher and or related service provider services, as we discuss, consultation and tutorials, services contracted through community or outside agencies. We don't see this as frequently. I think a lot of districts try to do their programming in-house, but this absolutely, again, it's based on need. It's based on the individual needs of the child and the discussion with the team that these things can be included. So if you think the offer of programming is not appropriate, you can ask for an alternative program that you feel is appropriate. So these are situations where that one size fits all kind of, Monday through Thursday, 9 to 11:30 ESY program that the district is running, and my students going there. And yes, their goals are different from other kids. Their instruction might look different from other kids, but that's not really getting at the meat of what I feel my child needs in this during the summer over the break, or it's running for the month of July only. And I feel like having the month of August off completely is going to be really difficult for my child because of the 7 factors that we discussed. And I feel like there's something else needed. And that could mean something very different compared to other peers that might be in ESY. Maybe my student specifically has a reading disability, and I know that if he went the whole month of August without some direct instruction in that area, he would never get back in September. It would take him way too long to catch up to where he would have been. Or maybe my child has, a very significant speech disorder, and he may not need academic programming, he may not need emotional support or social programming, but he definitely needs speech services to continue throughout, or maybe just more robust services for the entirety, or maybe there is a specialized speech program that he could go to in the summer. And to me, that's more valuable than him doing all of the other programming that could be provided through the district. Like I would almost, if he had a significant speech disorder, give up some of the other opportunities to work on his other goals, because this is the perfect time. He's at the perfect age. This is the perfect program time to really hit this. Those are discussions that can be had. Is it easy to do that? No, because districts, when they have their programming, they want to be able to provide the programming. They want to be able to track progress. They want your child to come to the district program. Some of it is about funding, obviously. And some of it also is just about setting a precedent. I know districts worry about, saying yes and looking like they favor certain parents or certain kids, and then, sort of opening the floodgates, so to speak, of parents asking for out of district programming for the summer. Because again, for those reasons, it's meant for maintenance. It's not meant for progress. And they feel like, yeah, this is a great program and your child would completely benefit from this program, but this isn't what we feel is appropriate under the law to maintain his skills for over the break. So I just think this is funny. It's like, okay, this sounds great. When is this happening? Like all of these regulations and all of these things that could be included, and you have the right to ask for these other programs, and this is what this could look like, and it's all supposed to be a discussion, and you're supposed to have an equal say because you're an equal partner in all this, and you're an expert in your kid, and all of this sounds great, but then you go to the meetings or you sit through presentations and you think, oh, so many things are possible, and then you go to the meeting and you kind of hit the brick wall, right? And that really never feels good. But I'm going to make me an offer I can't refuse. I'm going to let Rainey take over for a minute on this one. Go ahead, Rainey.
Yeah. So there are not all circumstances, but there are several circumstances under which when ESY is offered or discussed at an IEP meeting, there is a no-rep that document that we discussed earlier that follows. And so you must receive a no-rep in a few situations. One is if the district or school is proposing to add ESY services to an IEP that previously did not have ESY. Another scenario is when they're proposing to delete or remove ESY services from an IEP. Another situation is when they're refusing to initiate ESY services that have been requested by the parent. And then another situation is if they're proposing or refusing to change the provision of ESY services or the program. And what the no-rep has to contain is a description of the type and amount of ESY services that are being offered, the projected beginning and end date for the services, the frequency of the ESY services, and the location. All of that should be contained within the no-rep. And then another point that we don't have a slide on, but that I know at least came up in some of the preliminary questions, has to do with who is entitled to ESY services, and our students who are in parochial or private schools, can they receive ESY services? So if the student was placed at the non-public school, like through a no-rep or through the LEA or school district, then they are entitled to ESY services. If it's a situation where the parent unilaterally placed their child in a non-public school, then it is a conversation that can be had. It's not an entitlement, but the student has to be duly enrolled in the school district and that non-public school. And then you can request an IEP meeting to discuss whether they would benefit from ESY. Okay, not so fast. So what if the ESY offering or lack of ESY within the NOREP is something that a parent doesn't agree with? So you have a lot of different options. One is going through what's called IEP facilitation. This is a voluntary process where both parties, the parent and the school, essentially are asking for a third party to become involved and help facilitate a conversation within the confines of an IEP meeting. And there's a form on the Pennsylvania Office for Dispute Resolution website that a parent can fill out. Requesting an informal meeting is another avenue that you can take. The NOREP has on one of the pages, it gives parents the opportunity to agree with what's being offered, disagree, or request an informal meeting. So that's kind of this option here. You can also informally request a meeting in a variety of other ways, like through an email, but that is an option within the NOREP. Mediation, that's where you have a mediator that is a meeting with the district and the parents to discuss what it is that you're disagreeing with. If the parent brings a lawyer, then the school district is allowed to bring an attorney. But if the parent is not represented or doesn't have a lawyer, then the school district can't bring their legal counsel to mediation. Due process. Oh, sorry, Maria. Due process is filing a complaint, and you can do that on your own, pro se, or with the help of an attorney or an advocate. And there are a few different options that come with after filing a due process complaint. One is called a resolution meeting, which happens 15 days after a parent files the complaint. It's a forum for both sides to meet and discuss concerns. A hearing officer settlement conference is a conference that you can request after you filed a complaint, and you're essentially asking a different hearing officer than the one who is presiding over your case to meet with you to discuss, resolution. And then the last option is going to a hearing, and that's kind of like a mini trial.
Okay. So there was also a question in the chat about getting a NOREP and separate a NOREP for ESY, and is that separate from CCS, COVID compensatory services? And yes, COVID compensatory services were meant to be separate from what would be typically given as part of FAPE. So part of the free and appropriate public education, the programming that your child was getting. COVID compensatory services is meant to kind of sit on top and supplement that. It's not meant to be, your child does not get ESY, and we're giving you COVID compensatory services instead of ESY. If, in fact, your child should have qualified, or you feel like your child should have qualified for ESY. So that would be part of the discussion. I know that there are some districts or just some teachers, and sometimes it's like staff training and things like that, where they have meetings and they're not sure, is this a meeting I send a NOREP for, or I don't send a NOREP for? Sometimes if they send the IEP and it was supposed to be a NOREP attached to lay out what ESY services were offered because they're put into the IEP, but you did not get a NOREP, you can always request a NOREP. If you disagree, you can always file for a mediation, file for an IEP facilitation. You can always do those things. You don't absolutely have to do it through, the mechanism of a NOREP. And even sometimes parents will have a NOREP and check mediation and give it back to the district, but they don't realize they actually have to go and file for mediation. So, you can go on to the Office of Dispute Resolution, ODR, and you can file for mediation or IEP facilitation at any point in time. But if you feel like you need a NORAP to list out exactly what the offer of programming was and to truly understand what that offer looks like and respond meaningfully to that, whether it be informal meeting, you disapprove or you approve, you can always ask for that if your district is not providing that. And whether that's really a compliance issue, most of the time, it's really just a misunderstanding or training or inexperience of maybe a staff member that doesn't realize that a NORAP should have gone out. And even procedural things like that of being in compliance, without some other sort of harm that's caused from it, doesn't really amount to very much. It's frustrating for sure. But, if it's just an issue of you feel like you need it, don't hesitate to reach out and ask for it. So VIP, remember, it is your child and you are the most important part of the team. But, it certainly does not always feel that way. As parents, I feel like we are experts in our kids and we know them so well, but very often the number one complaint I hear from parents going to meetings, other than they walk in and feel very overwhelmed by the whole thing, is that they feel minimized. They feel like they don't always have a voice, or they don't always have a say, or they're not listened to. And it can be extremely frustrating when you're sitting in a room of, 10 or 12 people who are there to help you and your child, and you feel like you're not being heard, and they're not listening to your input. So in that vein, what does effective advocacy look like? And so these are kind of the staples that I hold to as when I do advocacy, is sort of that, that it's student focused. I always tell special ed directors and administrators, please take what parents are saying seriously, but never personally. So I really like when the conversation is always about the student and centered around the students, because I know a lot of times people with, when trust is lost and relationships become eroded, it's very difficult to stay focused on the child sometimes and not impose your own feelings on things. And so I think effective advocacy looks like it's always thinking about the student and not, getting in the way of personal relationships, although it may be hard. It's proactive. Education and bureaucracies like school districts are reactive, unfortunately, as much as I wish it did not work that way. So I feel like effective advocacy is proactive. I'm always thinking about what are the potentials to happen down the road? What does the future look like? I want to have a plan because I know that they're not thinking that way. And how am I advocating for the now, knowing what's coming ahead or the considerations of what could be coming ahead? And it's collaborative whenever possible. I try to take a very collaborative approach of two heads are better than one philosophy, and keep a good relationship with people in the district when I can. But there are definitely times when that is extremely difficult to do. So, but I do think that finding ways to effectively communicate, collaborate, and work together is where you make the most progress, if possible. And it's creative and open-minded. So I operate under the assumption that anything is possible. So let's start there. In the true spirit of individualization of programming, not just for ESY, but for school year 2, if anything was possible, what would we do? What would this program look like? What kind of supports would this child have? What would I build into their programming? And I kind of start from there. If all things were possible, what would it look like? And then what are the barriers to truly making it look that way? And keeping an open mind about things. Districts, as much as they're not proactive, they're reactive. They're also not creative thinkers and problem solvers. They have ways and methods that they do things. They train people in those ways and methods. So sometimes it does take some fresh eyes to the table to kind of get them to think outside the box or start thinking about creative options or problem solving through things. I often joke that, especially when I worked in autistic support, that the adults that were working with me sometimes were more rigid than the students I was working with. And we're doing lessons on flexibility, but the adults are not flexible. And that can be really frustrating when you're trying to operate in those systems. I also think it's funny that, teenage boys with autism are very often instructed in social skills by middle-aged women who have no idea what it's like to be a teenage boy, but that's for another topic. So it is based on a thorough understanding of the student's individual needs and rights. So anyone that's really advocating for your child, or even you want to make sure that you truly, thoroughly understand your child, or you understand the student's needs and then their rights. So educate yourself on rights, but also think about the needs. If there's something happening, if there's something that's going on, if there's something manifesting that you don't understand, we need to find a way to look into it. We need to see what's going on. We need an intervention. We need to collect data. We need an evaluation. We need something that is giving us that information. And this district has its mechanisms to do that. And then it empowers the students and parents. So educating yourself on rights, understanding truly the student's individual needs, being creative and open-minded, collaborative and proactive, all of those things will empower you to be a good advocate for your child, or if you're helping other families and kids. So practical ways to advocate. So these are just just a few of the very many ways that a parent can be a really effective advocate, and especially as it's related to ESY. So I always tell parents, keep paperwork that shows examples of what your child can produce or examples of concerns. So if you're saying my child, needs more occupational therapy or can't have a break from their occupational therapy over the summer, they just would regress too significantly. It's really helpful to have tangible things to point to. When you're just making general claims, but you don't have anything to kind of show, it can be very powerful to bring in, the work that you've been seeing your child come home, whether under certain conditions, your child is able to produce really nice work, but knowing that it takes those conditions to make that possible. Or if you're seeing them really struggling through, handwriting, and you're showing them examples of the work and how they have regressed over time, over the year, that the work is getting really sloppy. They're having a hard time forming their letters, and therefore they cannot have a break in their services because they really need to be working and concentrating on those skills. So build your team of people who know your child to add input. A lot of times people think that means doctors and I have to hire a psychologist, or I have to get an expert, I have to get a person. No, you can invite anyone who has special knowledge and understanding about your child to an IEP meeting. So one of my other points is bring someone to the meeting. That can really just be anyone who knows your child or who is supporting you. Because sometimes, or not sometimes, I feel like all the time when people are talking about your child, you may get stuck on something, or you may need to sit and process something that's being said, and then people keep talking and you're missing things. So as well as you feel you can take notes under those conditions, it's nice to have someone to go with you. It doesn't have to be someone you paid. It could be a family member, it could be a friend that comes with you to take notes, someone to gut check you after the meeting and have discussion, someone who may see or hear something differently than you, and you can process through together. Ask questions and gather information. I think that's part of the overwhelmingness of those meetings, that a lot of parents don't feel like they can just ask questions when they have questions, or just don't understand something, or people are talking too fast and they're really getting lost in a lot of the details or information. Like, please ask questions. Sometimes the team members don't even realize how fast they're talking or how quickly information is coming at you during those meetings. And a lot of them really unintentionally, I think, just rush through, and a lot of things can get miscommunicated, or there can be a lot of issues that come up just from not having the opportunity to clearly explain what you're trying to recommend. So I think that one is really crucial. Sorry. So educate yourself, but be careful. We always tell parents, like, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there. So try to stick to websites that are related to, .gov, Department of Ed, PATAN, or Patent, however everybody says it. And so try to stick to places are sharing accurate information. Sometimes blogs or even people might go research things online and find something that may be true in a different state, but not in Pennsylvania. So it's good to be careful when you're doing that. And I would say make an agenda so that you make sure you don't forget anything and you hit on anything that you want to discuss at that meeting. And then put everything in writing, summaries of calls, meetings, concerns, anything you want to keep track of, anything that you want to memorialize. Even if you're sending an email to the team, put it in writing, or sometimes just sending yourself an email just to make sure you're keeping track of things, because those are time-stamped and you'll have them in your email. And then make sure you add parental concerns to the IEP. A lot of times parents forget to do that. And especially when you get to that ESY discussion, if you keep track of your concerns throughout the school year, that is really a great way to go back and memorialize and summarize sort of all of the issues and concerns that you were seeing throughout the year if you're having multiple meetings. And a lot of times the case manager will summarize for the parent and just add things into the parental concerns. You are allowed to say, like, at the meeting, I will make sure we talk about our concerns at the meeting, but I will draft my concerns after and send them to you to be placed into the IEP. You absolutely are able to do something like that to make sure that it gets in the way you want it. It's your wording. Okay, so I feel like we ran through that pretty quickly. Rainey, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so I know we had some questions that we already had discussed before and that had come up for us. And then I know that people were kind of putting things in the chat. Here's our contact info. Like I said, please never hesitate to reach out. People call our office all the time, and we'd like to be a really good connector to resources. And I kid you not that sometimes people just call our office and say, like, my child has this kind of need or like behavioral need, and like, who's a good dentist for my child? And so we really love to be able to just help families in any way we can and share and give them information. So please don't hesitate to reach out.